So the session this evening is going to be focusing on the Indigenous Administration Micro-Credential 6, Module 4, which is going to be looking more into Orange Shirt Day and Territorial Acknowledgments. I'll let the instructor kind of give you some more details on that just as we move forward here. But I do just want to remind everyone that's here and participating that Northern Lakes College promotes a welcoming, respectful, fair, and inclusive environment. Please treat each other with respect and kindness. Disruptive or disrespectful behavior will result in removal from the session. Northern Lakes College respectfully acknowledges that we are located on Treaty 8 territory and Métis Nation of Alberta Districts 13 through 15 and 20 through 22, the traditional lands of First Nations and Métis peoples. We recognize the 15 First Nations and 4 Métis settlements located throughout our service region. Now, we do have some supports available for participants here just because the subject matter can be a little bit upsetting and can bring out some emotional responses. So if you need some support as we move through this session, please feel free to reach out to any of the supports that are listed up on the screen there. I'm going to turn it over to your instructor here, Jason. He's a Northern Lakes College alumni, and we've had the pleasure of working with him over the last few years to create our Indigenous Administration Micro-Credential program, which is something that he's going to be speaking to in his presentation today. I won't get too much into the details of the incredible things that he's done with his life. I'll let him tell that to you himself because he can fill in a little bit more details than I can. But he is a proud member of the Métis settlement of East Prairie, and he devotes a lot of his time investing in and passing on traditional knowledge and values.
Thank you, Joanna, and welcome. So my name is Whitehorse. My colonized name is Jason Big Charles, and I am coming to you from the East Prairie Métis settlement, where I was born and raised. I lived here my entire life. Grew up in a very traditional manner, hunting, gathering, learning about medicines, practicing our traditional practices, spiritualism. Was a powwow dancer for many years. Am a father of 7 and a very proud grandfather of 17 beautiful grandchildren. So yeah, I'm slowly building my own Métis settlement with my family. So I've been an educator for well over 25 years now. Started out in the classroom as an elementary school teacher for just over 15 years. Deeply enjoyed my time in the classroom as an elementary school teacher. From there, I moved on to, I did do 1 year of junior high during my career. And I'm still suffering historical trauma from that experience. But after moving out of the classroom, I moved into working in a school administration, first as a land-based learning specialist, then as a land-based learning specialist and curriculum specialist. Because throughout my teaching career, I was very passionate about trying to bring my traditional knowledge and teachings into curriculum. So that brought me to really working with curriculum and looking closely at curriculum. And just over the past few years, I moved into being a consultant and working all across Canada, focusing on Indigenous culture and curriculum. So it's been a great experience. Was very honored to be invited back to Northern Lakes College because it's through Northern Lakes College that I did earn my Bachelor of Education. that started out my professional career. So it was great to come back and help to develop the Indigenous Administration Micro-Credential Program. And we're going to be looking at a little part of that today. But before I really get into the subject matter, which today we're going to focus on Orange Shirt Day and Territorial Acknowledgments, which are part of the micro-credential program, Indigenous Administration micro-credential program. It is micro-credential number 6, and each micro-credential does have modules, and one of those modules focuses on truth and reconciliation. All right, so the web page that you're seeing now is on the Northern Lakes College website. And if you go to continuing education and corporate training, you will see under program and courses, you'll see the Indigenous Administration Micro-Credential Certificate Program. If you click on that, it'll take you to this page here, and it'll give you a little bit of information about the Indigenous Administration Certificate. So who would benefit from the certificate program? Anybody who's working uh, or looking to increase their understanding of Indigenous culture, history, politics, and economic issues. This can benefit those who are new to Canadian culture and professionals who work with any Indigenous population in fields such as education or industry. So through developing and working with this program and administering this program, I can tell you that uh, a lot of the program attendees that we get are people who are either just entering a new profession, focusing on working with Indigenous communities or Indigenous organizations, as well as Indigenous people who haven't had the experience of growing up inside the culture and are really looking to build their cultural knowledge or reclaim their cultural knowledge and practices. So those are the types of people who generally take these courses. But if you look at the course listing, for those who have never taken a micro-credential course before, what the micro-credential structure is like is with a micro-credential course, it is very, very much student-directed, which means although we have sort of a general schedule on the start date and the end date, how quickly you work through those modules is entirely based on uh, your schedule, because we really take into mind and try and tailor the micro-credential structure around the understanding that most people are either going to school or they have full-time jobs, and they generally don't have the time to take, say, a full-time certificate program. So that's how the micro-credential courses are sort of structure, allowing you that ability to be able to take the courses uh, at your convenience. So each micro-credential generally has either 3 to 4 modules in it. Each module usually runs about a week. So it's in general a micro-credential course. So the first one here you see listed here, treaties, titles, and land claims, would generally, that one would have 3 modules in it. So we generally gear it or structure it very loosely to run at 1 week per module. So you generally have 3 weeks to complete that micro-credential. So within each micro-credential and within each module, there are 3 assessments that you do. So there's one reflection assignment, one discussion group assignment, and one quiz that you do. And all of the modules are geared that way. So here you see sort of, we have 9 micro-credentials in the Indigenous Administration Certificate. So you see the first one, treaties, titles, and land claims, Indian Act, band councils, reserves, Indigenous self-government, language and culture, hunting, gathering, and stewardship, ceremonies and protocols, educational partnership, industry partnerships, and economic development. So those are the 9 micro-credentials that you'd work through in order to receive your Indigenous Administration certificate. So that is basically what the program looks like. For the purpose of today, we are going to be looking specifically at one of these modules within that certificate program. And I'm just going to try and navigate through my... All right. So today we're looking at micro-credential number 6, ceremonies and protocols, because within this micro-credential, this is where we have the subject matter on truth and reconciliation, and more specifically, Orange Shirt Day and our territorial acknowledgments. All right, so this is what it'll look like once you do get into one of the micro-credential programs. And as I had said, each micro-credential has a series of modules in there. So here we are looking at this micro-credential has 4 modules. So on the left-hand side, you'll see Module 1 was Elder Protocols, Module 2, Powwows and Powwow Etiquette, Module 3, Pipe, Sweat Lodge, Sundance, and Other Ceremonies, and Module 4, which we're looking at today, Truth and Reconciliation. So this is what the modules look like, and generally you work through the material in each unit within each module. So this module, module number 4, has 5 units that you go through. So this more earlier today, we worked on going through unit 1, 2, 3 of this micro-credential. And I think that recording is available. I think all you need to do is contact Johanna or somebody at Northern Lakes College to get the recording of that session. But we'll be looking closely at Unit 4 and 5 today, September 30th, and Territorial Acknowledgments. So I'm just going to change my screens here. So Unit 4 talks about September 30th, and more specifically, what's come to be known as Orange Shirt Day. So before we start looking at the material in here, I would like you to just, in the chat again, give me an idea, a very brief statement on what Orange Shirt Day is to you right now. What is your understanding of Orange Shirt Day, and what is it? Why do we do it? So I'll give you a quick minute or two just to put that in the chat, and just give me a quick sense of what you know right now about Orange Shirt Day, and what are we doing on Orange Shirt Day? What is it recognizing? And while you're typing in what you know right now, I'll just talk a little bit about the session this morning. What we really worked on was defining truth and reconciliation, and more specifically, reconciliation, and what is reconciliation. I think if you really want to get an idea of what we discussed in that session, please ask for the recording. But I'll just give you a quick understanding that as Indigenous people, especially as Cree people, I can mainly only speak for the Cree culture that I was brought up in. But I had talked to our elders and really tried to gain an understanding of what reconciliation is. So I was asking elders because in the Cree that I know, I couldn't think of a Cree word for reconciliation. So I did talk to a number of elders and knowledge keepers, and the consensus was that we really have no concept or no word for reconciliation. Uh, you'll see a lot of places right now using the Cree term Kwayaskwastasuan. And with Kwayaskwastasuan, how that translates is making things right. But when I talked to elders about that, they said it doesn't really mean about uh, the concept of reconciliation. That's mostly about like if something was out of place or you're making things right. That's more what that term means. So in our discussions, they said we really don't have a term for reconciliation. So when I pressed a little further with my elders and family members, I sort of asked, why do you think that is? And the overall summarized response that I got was that as Indigenous people, we didn't have a term for reconciliation because there was really nothing so horrible that we've done to somebody else that required reconciliation. So that really got me thinking about reconciliation itself and why there's such a difficulty, especially for Indigenous people, uh, to understand reconciliation. Is because in our ancestral language, we had no term to describe reconciliation. And really pressing my mentors who are spiritual followers and those sweat lodge holders and pipe holders, they said it was mainly because of the deep understanding and belief in Pastahoan. And with Pastahoan, it's our belief that we are governed by natural justice, or in other cultures they call it karma. So we have the universe uh, is keeping things in balance. So there should not be within Indigenous culture there should not be any need for reconciliation because of that belief, and we wouldn't do anything so horrible to somebody because of natural justice. So just a little bit of background on reconciliation and just sort of build your understanding of why we may be having a difficult time moving forward with reconciliation. But we'll get on to what is Orange Shirt Day and what are we doing uh, with Orange Shirt Day. Very first, it signifies a specific event as a result of residential school. And it was the experience of Phyllis Webstad, who really brought out the orange shirt movement. And we're just going to watch a quick little video here because once we do get into uh, the September 30th, the unit 4 of this micro credential, it really focuses on that orange shirt day. But I'm just going to share my screen here again. And you'll see on this unit 4 that it talks about September 30th as being National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, but it's come to be really recognized and synonymously recognized as Orange Shirt Day. So again, there each year, September 30th marks the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. This day pays tribute to the children who never came back from residential school, and it acknowledges survivors along with their families and communities. During this time, the public commemorates the tragic and painful history as well as the continuous repercussions of residential schools. This all plays a crucial role in the journey towards reconciliation. So we're going to watch this video on with Phyllis Webstad describing the origin of Orange Shirt Day.
Hello, everyone. My name is Phyllis Webstad. I am Shawetmch from the Strachamch, Kenno Creek, Hatstam, Dog Creek First Nation, which is about 1.5 hours southwest from Williams Lake, BC. I grew up with my granny on the Dog Creek Reserve until I was 10, then moved with my auntie after she finished university. When I had just turned 6, I was sent to the St. Joseph Indian Residential School near Williams Lake, a place we called the Mission. My granny bought me a shiny new orange shirt to go to school in. When I got there, I was stripped, my clothing taken away, including my new orange shirt, and I never saw it again. I was no longer excited to be going to school. I wanted to go home to Granny. I had to stay there for 300 sleeps. No matter how much all of us little kids cried, it didn't matter. No one listened to us. Our feelings didn't matter. We didn't matter. I am the third generation that attended residential school. Both my grandmother and mother attended the mission for 10 years each. Today is a day to honor and remember residential school survivors and their families. Every child matters, even if you're an adult. We must also remember those children that never made it and are no longer with us. Today is a day for survivors to tell their stories and for us to listen with open hearts. I am humbled and honored that you are all taking part in Orange Shirt Day. When I was in school, I didn't know my own history, so I am overjoyed that you are taking part and learning the true history of Canada's First Peoples. Gukshjem, thank you.
So very simply, the orange shirt that we see now represented throughout Canada represents the story of Phyllis Webstad. And Phyllis Webstad is still very active throughout Canada as an advocate for bringing forward truth and reconciliation with really working with survivors of residential school. Now, I did have a chance to meet Phyllis at one of the conferences that I was at. Uh, Very sincere, uh, very touching uh, story that she has that really brings to light a very brief snapshot of what Indigenous people were going through with the residential school system, where she was so proud of the orange shirt that her kokum, her grandmother, had bought her, and she was proud to go show this shirt at the school where she was starting residential school, but to be stripped of everything she was proud of, and having really everything that made her happy taken away from her as she entered residential school really gives a good clear snapshot of the experience of residential school survivors. Now, I think as Indigenous people, every single one of us has a personal story about being touched or having witnessed somebody in our family having attended residential school and hearing those stories. I'll just give you an idea of one that really sticks with me and is forever will be burnt into my spirit. My mother's sister, the oldest child in her family, there were 13 of them, and her oldest sister, my aunt, was spent the longest in residential school. Because she was the oldest, she was the first one taken to residential school. Now, we grew up spending a lot of time still uh, after we were born, and my mother and her siblings, a lot of them moved here to East Prairie, and we lived as a very tight, close-knit family, very much maintaining that traditional extended family view where we were very close. We looked at our aunts as our mothers. We looked at our uncles as our fathers, and it was a very close family. However, we got to see the effects that they went through as a result of residential school. in particular my aunt, my mother's oldest sister. She, in our eyes, growing up, was very cold, never very physical, no hugs, no show of real emotion, never an I love you or anything like that. Very stern, very harsh. And that's how she brought up not only her kids, but us as well, because we were sort of raised by her as well, being uh, my mother's sister. So throughout her life, it was always like that. She was always looked at it as very harsh, and even her children said that they never did see any affection from her. And so what happened is just within, I think it was maybe 3 or 4 years ago, that I was visiting with her, and still very enjoyable, enjoyable woman, talks, laughs, but that lack of affection was always there. But on this particular visit with her, when I got up to leave, it was usually with I'll see you later, thanks for the tea, or and she looked at me, and she looked at first a little apprehensive, and then she opened her arms as though wanting a hug. And I could tell the discomfort she was feeling in that. But I walked up to her and I gave her a hug, and I could feel her trembling. And she looked at me with tears in her eyes, and she said, "It took me over 65 years to learn how to hug again." She said, "But I'm learning." So, because of her experiences, it took her entire life of missing out on love and affection or showing it, but to finally reach the age she was at to be able to hug again. Just a simple hug. To you and me, that might be simple, but this is how deep the trauma runs in residential school survivors. And I think every one of us as Indigenous people has these stories. My mother is well attended, my uncles, they all have stories of residential school, but the one that always burns into my spirit is the sadness I felt for my aunt to have to go through life without that affection or showing affection. And very much so in working with the content matter that I do work with now, I could very much see, because she was robbed of the chance to experience observing motherhood, or being able to observe uh, child rearing and affection and showing affection to children. Because she never had that, we can't expect that she'd be able to show that, because she had nowhere to really learn that. So that's just another snapshot of the historical trauma that Indigenous peoples went through, especially the survivors of residential school. And how does that affect us today? I can very much tell you that historical trauma is very real, not only in the people my age, because I can tell you 100% that myself and my cousins, especially my aunt's children, definitely suffered the effects of that without having that child rearing experience, that affection and love. They were robbed of that, and it very much affects them in their lives today, and how they dealt with their children and with their grandchildren. So we see that sort of um, historical trauma snowball effect, where it just keeps going. And how does it stop? That is exactly what, with truth and reconciliation, and with the work that Phyllis Webstad is trying to do, it's not only it's healing historical trauma through reconciliation. But for those again who missed this morning's session, Again, I'd urge that you watch that because I had talked a lot about reconciliation and how do we move forward with reconciliation. And again, how do we move forward with healing historical trauma? And Orange Shirt Day is very much about that, just bringing to light and bringing awareness to the fact that there are not only residential school survivors out there, but that there are those that suffer historical trauma because of residential school and through residential school survivor that are even more prevalent, or there's even more people out there that are going through historical trauma, especially if they're children of residential school survivors. They are the ones who are really living through that historical trauma. So it didn't just end with the residential school survivor. It goes on in their children and in their grandchildren, uh, because I could definitely see that with my aunt, even with her grandchildren, and well, her children, then her grandchildren, and even now with her great grandchildren. She was very much robbed of the ability to show them that love and affection as Indigenous people. Uh, there's so many other speakers out there on historical trauma and residential school survivors, and I'm just trying to remember the name of another memorable speaker that I heard. I he's going to bother me because he's actually a friend of mine. We always run into each other at conferences, and uh, he was a chief in Saskatchewan. But basically, what he generally talks about is how, as Indigenous people, uh, and especially looking at survivors like Phyllis Webstad and her orange shirt story, how very much as Indigenous people, we we grew up as what he calls living uh, with vertical upbringing, which means that very much when as we were growing as Indigenous people, with our extended families, we had our sisters, our mothers, our grandmothers, our great grandmothers, and our great great grandmothers, but it was all in a vertical lifestyle, how we were taught to live, and we looked at them all as our mother. And what happened with a residential school he talks about is as soon as our our children hit the residential schools, they were forced that that horizontal, that vertical way of living that they were used to as Indigenous people was taken from them, and they were forced to live a horizontal lifestyle, which lacked all of that maternal and paternal support and the extended family and the immediate family, and they were forced to live in a horizontal manner. So it really speaks to the importance of family and how the family unit really contributes to the way we're brought up traditionally as Indigenous people. So this is very much what Phyllis Webstad lost when she entered residential school. She lost all of that, those family experiences. How do we learn how to rear children? How do we learn how to love children? How do we learn how to raise children? It's all within our experiences at an early age growing up and learning those skills as we're being brought up. Remember, all those who were sent to residential school were robbed of that. They did not get to experience love and affection. They did not get to experience how do you gently or lovingly discipline children. They did not receive any of that natural training that would normally be look like it would be natural to us. But as residential school survivors, it was something that they had to try and learn later on in life after residential school. So of course they got very different experiences, and it shows in their children and in their grandchildren today. So I hope you've gained a deeper understanding of Orange Shirt Day and recognize that it's not just Phyllis Webstad's story itself, but it's a greater representation of that snapshot of what our residential school survivors suffered. And that's uh, basically what that orange shirt is representing. Before I move on to looking at territorial acknowledgments, any questions or comments on the Orange Shirt Day itself and the story of Phyllis Webstad? Just going to check the chat here. So Sarah says, I have a similar experience my grandmother went through, and she recently said she loved me back for the first time. I've never stopped saying it to her, though I knew this was from residential school. Yes, very true. We hear those stories every day, and each one of us has a personal story that we're touched within our own families. So let's move on to territorial acknowledgments. So we've heard many, many different forms of territorial acknowledgments, and this micro-credential sort of gives just a basic overview of why we do territorial acknowledgments and examples of territorial acknowledgments. And it gives specific examples of specific territorial acknowledgments. So if you have time, you can find these videos on YouTube. So this one is just called Territorial Acknowledgements, CTL at U of A. So if you were to search that, you'll be able to find that video on YouTube, because unfortunately we don't have time to show that video right now. But I'm going to talk to you just a little bit because this is something that has really been discussed just within the last few months or since June and July. So I do a lot of work with the College of Alberta School Superintendents, and one of the things we really focused on was really trying to develop um, a very meaningful territorial acknowledgement with the College of Alberta School Superintendents. And during that work, we worked with a number of elders, knowledge keepers throughout Alberta, just to try and capture a territorial acknowledgement that would be meaningful to Indigenous people. Because basically with territorial acknowledgements, that's what we are acknowledging, not only the land, but the people that belong to the land of wherever we are at the time we're giving an acknowledgement. And one of the things I always bring forward is that as Indigenous people, we also give a territorial acknowledgement, and this is something we've always done. And this is something I do anytime I go into a different nation's territory. I go to an elder from that territory and I request permission to bring my teachings onto their territories. And usually when I do this, I make sure that it's very visible and very vocal where people can see me doing it, because our elders are saying we need to bring back our cultural practices, even those that we only do to each other as Indigenous people. And that's one of them, is acknowledging when I leave my territory, I need to acknowledge that I'm going into somebody else's territory. So when we were working with territorial acknowledgements, that really brought to light that if we as Indigenous people recognize specific territories, if I am going on to and doing some work or bringing my knowledge onto a neighboring nation, If I go to one of my neighboring nations, Sucker Creek First Nation, if I am going to go do a presentation or a teaching there, then I need to approach one of their elders and request permission to bring my teachings onto their territory, because that's what we did traditionally. So in doing a territorial acknowledgement, we really have to think about, as a non-Indigenous person coming in and doing a territorial acknowledgement, you need to do your homework. Our elders are saying that if we're acknowledging treaty territories, the treaty designations were a post-contact designation. We need to go back to our pre-contact designations where we recognized each other as nations, individual nations. So if I am coming into my area, say if I was coming to East Prairie and doing, as a non-Indigenous person working in East Prairie, I would do a territorial acknowledgement that acknowledges the specific territories I'm on. So not just the East Prairie Métis territory. I would recognize that I am on the territory of Driftpile First Nation. I am also on the traditional territory of Sucker Creek First Nation and on the territory of Gruard First Nation. And whichever nation whose traditional hunting and gathering territory I'm on, we need to identify those nations individually as we're on their traditional territories. So our elders are really saying we need to move away from recognizing territory as treaty territories, because again, those were post-contact territories. Pre-contact, we proudly we're very proud of our own nation names and our own nation traditional hunting and gathering territories. So in terms of doing a territorial uh, a land acknowledgement wherever you are, take a minute and really think, which specific nation's lands are you on right now? So say if you were in Slave Lake, you were on the Sawridge First Nations territory. So you'd need to acknowledge them specifically. Or on the Swan River First Nations, we would recognize them specifically by name. So again, it's just taking it a bit deeper and a bit further rather than saying we are on Treaty 8, because remember, on Treaty 8, if you say you're on Treaty 8 territory, that's a vast territory, but it really leaves out the acknowledgement of each individual nation. So it's really looking at where we are physically. I thank you very much today. I hope you learned something new, and more importantly, I hope you take whatever knowledge you've gained and pass it forward and pass that knowledge on, because that is the biggest part of reconciliation that we need to do, is that in the sharing and then sharing each other's stories and knowledge. So kinanas kong tinawal kahkiao, in my grandmother's tongue. I always like to say that a lot of people think in my grandmother's tongue that that means thank you. However, our Cree language and all our Indigenous language are much deeper in anything. We don't have a simple, specific language or word for things in our languages. So when I do say kinanaskum tin, I am really not just saying thank you. How it translates, translates as my heart and my spirit is lifted by this exchange. So when I say kinanaskum tinawao, kahkiao, I'm saying my heart and spirit has been lifted by the exchange we all just had. So kinanaskum tinawao, kahkiao. Hi, hi.